Hello there, hidden hermit. Now, I'd like you all to check underneath your beds. Make sure your closet doors are shut. I've got some nice calm music playing in the background. I don't know if you can hear it. I've also got some very grounding rocks and gems going on here, including my awesome obsidian shard and some cracking raw hematite. Because today we're going to be talking about the Nine of Swords. So the Nine of Swords, you immediately look at that and you're thinking, oh no. And one of the buzzwords for the Nine of Swords is nightmares. And, well, I would agree with that. But before I get into it, let's give you all the background. The Nine of Swords is, of course, a sword. Swords are associated with air. And here is the Ace of Swords, just to reiterate that. Now, the suit of swords is concerned with states of mind, mental activity, communication, intellect, ideas, philosophy, and very much in the case of the Nine of Swords, psychology. From an astrological viewpoint, the Nine of Swords rules the second decan of Gemini. Gemini, here's Gemini, is ruled by the Lover's card. The ruling planet of Gemini is Mercury, and in the tarot that is of course the Magician. Hello mate. The court card that rules this decan and indeed the previous decan of Gemini is the Knight of Swords, and the planet that rules the second decan. The second decan of Gemini is 11 to 20 degrees Gemini, and it's roughly the 1st to the 10th of June. But the planet that rules the second decan of Gemini is Mars. And look at Mars. Typical warrior there. Looking pretty mean and buff, has to be said. And Mars in the tarot is signified by the Tower. So I'm just going to move this giant Nine of Swords out the way. So what have we got there? You got Gemini the Lovers. You got Mercury the Magician. The Knight of Swords, the court card ruler, and Mars the Tower. And they just about squeeze in there. And if you add all these together, put them in a blender, mix them up, bit of sugar, spoon it out, you get the Nine of Swords. And I'll tell you why. So Gemini, the Lovers, it's concerned with that synchronicity and that melding of two minds. It could very well be romantic, they could be siblings or just really good friends. The Magician, the guy that has all the tools, and also it's worth to note here, because I think it's important, that he can also be a bit of a trickster. The Knight of Swords is all about swiftness and action. He's holding the sword of truth there. He's the knightiest knight in all of the court cards, closely followed by the Knight of Wands, of course. But he's very knightly, and he likes his action. And of course, the Tower. The Tower, or to give it one of its antiquities, and its names from Antiquity. I always try and make words up, try and sound clever. Antiquitous is not a word, as far as I know. Well, it can be now. Anyway, the Tower has also been referred to as the House of God, and indeed war. So Gemini and the Magician are very, very happy doing their thing. The Knight of Swords, he comes along and he just, he backs the Magician up. However, once Mars comes along, he puts a spanner in the works. And instead of Mars with his wrath and his strength and his anger, he realizes that you don't need to be physically strong to cause harm. You can also do it in the mind, which is exactly what the Nine of Swords is about. Did that make sense? Yeah, sure. Why not, eh? So the Nine of Swords, when we think about the Nine of Swords, some of the key words that often come up, and the Nine of Swords again is one of those cards where the interpretation of it, the understanding of the card is pretty straightforward across all decks and all disciplines. There is very little argument. Once you reverse it, you getting a little bit more. You get a bit more variety, if you like. But when it's upright, when it just comes out in a reading, yeah, most people agree. And some of the keywords associated with the Nine of Swords are things such as nightmares, phobias, worry, failure, delay, deception, disappointment, despair, isolation, sadness, fear, grief, shame, utter desolation, which is kind of harsh, but not as harsh as in some of the older decks, death and miscarriage, which is a bit scary. In fact, death and miscarriage in Arthur Waite's Key to the Pictorial Tarot, they're some of the keywords with this card. Also, anxiety, depression, cycles of worry, cruelty, despondency, malice, oh my goodness, I can't say words. Psychopaths, relationship worries, imprisonment, suspicion, doubt, fear, sleeping difficulties, and rumour. So it's all quite negative. And let's be honest, the Nine of Swords is a negative card. I don't understand how you can pull this card and say, oh, everything's going to be all sunshine and flowers and little bunnies running around. It's a negative card. It could be both a warning or a reminder. It can inform you that you need to take a step back and take a breath. But we'll get into that. Also, in some of the decks specifically the Atelier deck, which predates the Golden Dawn decks, including the Waitesmith, the Nine of Swords used to symbolize a nun, a priest, or a cloistered person, or a cult, a temple, church, or monastery, which is interesting. Some of these things do come into play, but Atelier, he was kind of bonkers, to be perfectly honest. He was a bit mad. He just did his own thing. So, despite the fact that the interpretation is quite the same across the board, I personally feel that there are aspects of the Nine of Swords that a lot of people just miss. I consider the Nine of Swords very much I'm going to put that back down here and get this one. I consider the Nine of Swords to be a very 21st century card. There's a lot of talk these days about looking after your own mental health. And depression, anxiety, panic attacks, bipolar disorders, they're all real things. Now, a lot of the interpretations of the Nine of Swords suggest that these worries and this anxious despondency is all in the mind. However, things like anxiety and depression, yeah, they can just all be in the mind, but they manifest in very serious, very unhealthy ways, and you can't just give yourself a slap and tell yourself to snap out of it. Or indeed, you can't slap somebody else and tell them to pull themselves together. It's not that easy. And I think that the Nine of Swords taps into that a little bit. Considering this card is 110 years old, or at least this design is, I think it's almost foreshadowed a lot of the chat around mental health. And mental health itself is still a huge taboo subject, which, hopefully where more and more people use tarot, which they probably won't, maybe we can get around that. Never mind. We'll talk more about that as we work through my little pile of cards. And it is a little pile today. There are less cards than usual in my usual minor arcana videos. But some of the designs are absolutely cracking. Absolutely brilliant. So, yeah, here's the Waitesmith. And you have... Everybody always describes it as a woman, but it's a person. There's a person, they're in bed. It's the middle of the night. I say it's the middle of the night because the background is dark and they're in bed. It's a bit of a giveaway. And they're in despair. They got their head in their hands. They're clearly either overthinking something. There are worries that are keeping them awake, or they've woken up from a nightmare. I think everybody has experienced that, where you dream something and it's so alarming that it wakes you up. Now, a couple of other things to note in this card. He's under a bedspread. He or she is under a bedspread, and I didn't notice this until I actually read a book, but there you have the glyphs of the zodiac there. Aries right in the middle there, Moon up to the top. I can see Gemini, Leo. I can see one I don't recognise. I think it could be Capricorn. But yeah, so he's under a bedspread that's got the heavens on it. Also, I have also read that the swords that are above him, you could imagine they're sort of hanging on the wall. Not the cleverest place to put 9 swords, I would imagine, but there's no light reflecting off them, so it kind of suggests that these swords are somewhat imaginary. Okay, let's get cracking, let's move on. So that's the Waitsmith, and I'm getting into the habit of starting with the After Tarot, and I may as well do the same thing. Here you can clearly see it's a guy, but again, it could be a person. It could just be a masculine woman with a sharp haircut. But these bad dreams have actually manifested here. So not only is this dragon, this baby dragon maybe, is coming down, but he's also defending himself with one of the swords. Yeah, so that I just counted them. There is indeed 8 on the wall, or levitating. So he may very well still be dreaming. He may very well be using an imaginary weapon to fight an imaginary monster. But fighting his demons he is. Good for him. Her. Them. We'll move through, as usual, the decks that ape the Waitsmith image. So here is the Mystic Dreamer. Unlike the Waitsmith, you have got light reflecting off those swords that are just hanging there. Again, the woman, you know, she can't sleep, can she? Because she's in her bedclothes. She's got a lovely little ankle bracelet on there. As with a lot of the Mystic Dreamer cards, there's the moon. Moon loves to make an appearance. You've also got a teddy bear in a box underneath the bed, and if you've watched any of my other videos, the Mystic Dreamer book always tells you to use your intuition, and what does that teddy bear mean? What do you think is in that box? I don't know. Perhaps that woman would feel much better if the teddy bear was in bed with her. Perhaps that box has just got, I don't know, I can only think of naughty things, to be honest. Psh, keepsakes, who knows. But yeah, an image that pretty much apes the Waitsmith, with the exception of the window and a moon. Moving on to the Dreaming Way, again, very, very similar. This woman kind of suggests that she might be hearing things as well, and some very artistically rendered swords there. Again, if you look at the bedspread, not so much astrological symbols, but definitely stars. I will probably forget to mention it, so I should probably mention it now, but it has been suggested in some text that the heavenly blanket, or the, you know, the astrological duvet, if you like, is kind of a protection. Could it be? I mean, they don't look very protected, but there you go. That's it for the cards that ape the Waitsmith. So we'll move on to the beautiful decks. Here is Shadowscapes, and what a cracking image this is. What an amazing image. So, oh, can I just go back, actually? Mystic Dreamer. This is really bad. In the book, the Mystic Dreamer also suggests that it could mean the use and abuse of sleep-inducing drugs, which is new and different. And I would go as far to say that it could also symbolise the use and abuse of any sort of drug, including alcohol and indeed caffeine. There may be a reason why these people can't sleep. Sorry about that time slip. Let's go back to Shadowscapes. So this card is cracking. A few things to notice about this. You have this storm vortex going on. There's nothing to suggest the person on the image, and it's probably male. Yeah, it's male. There's nothing to suggest they're dreaming. This could very well be a nightmare, but we don't know. Now you have a raven on his shoulder, and the book that comes with it, it's presented as little stories behind the cards. The raven's saying, look, if you trust me, I can get you through this storm. And he's kind of unsure. He's brandishing a sword, but he's not, well, he's carrying a sword, he's not brandishing it. And the only other swords are the tattoos on his chest to sort of signify despairs and worries and bad things that have happened to him. It's an amazing card. It's very, very pretty. It requires a lot of thought, but it's one of the more, I was going to say it was one of the more striking, but all the Shadowscape cards are very striking. But yeah, so slightly different, same vibe, obviously. Here's the Line Strider, and the Line Strider is a bit of an enigma. If you read the book, it says the same as everything else. All the keywords are there. It does add that you should focus your sword of intellect and brutally cut to the heart of the matter. The interesting thing about this card is it shows a fox who seems a little bit disturbed. Despite the fact that foxes are nocturnal creatures and they should be used to the dark, it appears that this fox has forgotten that. It's a very pretty fox, and I'm just looking at the images on. It also has a bedspread, a fox with a rock that's got nice little shapes on it. I don't know what that means. Never mind. Again, a very pretty card. Okay, brace yourselves, because the Wild Unknown does not pull any punches. If you're thinking of imagery of nightmares, check this out. Holy moly. So you've got like a jawbone of some sort of animal, maggots, eyeballs. It's a disturbing card. There's no two ways about it. And so, you know, I think it's supposed to incite some sort of fear, and it's supposed to be monstrous. And I think I think Kim Krause is really going for the nightmare angle in the Wild Unknown. The Wild Unknown, the book, also suggests that dark visions, and of course you don't have to be asleep to experience a dark vision. That could just be another way of, you know, you're sitting there, you're thinking about bad things, and when you think about bad things, they tend to play over and over in your head. I mentioned Cycles of Worry, which I can't remember which deck that was from, but yeah, these things go in cycles, and that's how people get anxious. That's how people can spiral into things like depression, because they think the same things over and over again without any sort of alterations, without any conscious effort to change that line of thought. And that's one of the myriad reasons why people can suffer things like panic attacks and debilitating depression. And there is really no cure, to be honest, apart from, I suppose the first step is just to face the fact that you are experiencing these cycles. Wild Unknown, nightmare. It continues with the cracking images. Here is the fountain, and just look at this. This is amazing. The fountain stresses the idea of imagined misery, an intimate brand of misery, I believe it says. And it suggests that you should sift reality from imaginary horrors. Now, that's easier said than done. I may start repeating myself at this point, but you know, if you do suffer from anxiety and depression, it doesn't matter how it manifests in your head, it is still very real. But nevertheless, look at this card. I mean, the colour scheme is incredible, and I don't know how close I can get without it blurring, but look at the expression on that guy's face. That is abject fear. And you know, the proportions of the card it's almost as if something is coming towards him. It's almost as if something is reaching out for him as well. I mean, if you look at the lines, those red lines that are sort of crawling up him, but the perspective it is very direct, because look at the size of his hand compared to the size of his head. Something's coming straight for him. Terrifying card, but beautiful at the same time. Now, at this point, I'm going to start going through the dark decks, as if we haven't been dark enough, but here is the Quantum Tarot. If I can just shine the embossed swords there. Now, the placement of the image is very similar to the Waite Smith. Now, you got two images. I'm not sure if you can make it out. You got two images at the bottom there, and they've both got their hands to their heads, and it's all blurred. It's all very 80s horror. But you got the swords sort of levitating in the air. Now, the cosmological subtitle to the Quantum Tarot is Matter, Antimatter, Annihilations, which basically means that every particle of matter in existence has got a theoretical antiparticle. For example, electrons have positrons, and quarks have antiquarks, and if they ever meet each other, they would just annihilate each other. There is a big theory, and this is probably a bit of a tangent, there is a big theory to suggest that all matter in the universe is left over from a huge annihilation, and although we perceive it as a lot of matter, a lot of stuff out there, is actually a minuscule amount. The balance of the universe between matter and antimatter was so tight that all the matter left over is a minuscule amount of what was actually left. and that makes up our universe, our reality. And that is a huge tangent. I'm sorry about that. But the quantum also goes on to explain the idea of self-defeating cycle of neurosis. And neurosis, there's a complicated word to be thrown around in a tarot video, that's for sure. The Dark Grimoire, the suit of swords in the Dark Grimoire manifests as demons, and this guy is looking in the mirror and he is a demon. It's very Kafkaesque, this image, as well as Lovecraftian, obviously, but the connotations are very simple there. He sees himself as something he's not, because there's nothing to suggest that his actual face looks like that. However, interestingly, this guy has brought himself to look in the mirror. So whether that it will lead to some sort of acknowledgement of his mental predicament or not, who knows? Who knows? I don't usually use this deck, and I seem to say that every other video, but this is the Dark Royo Tarot. I'm not keen on this deck because it's unnecessarily smutty. However, this is an interesting... Well, the image is kind of self-explanatory, but the explanation in the book says embarrassment of nudity. Now, I immediately assume that it's the woman that's being embarrassed of being nude, but she's not. It's that evil demon guy. Now, if that evil demon guy suddenly popped up in one of my dreams, or indeed in reality, my embarrassment of his nudity will be the least of my worries, to be perfectly honest. The book in the Dark Royo also goes on to suggest that empty thoughts, and the card is a vibe of empty thoughts and shallow sentences, which is somewhat poetic, albeit a little bit forced. But yes, again, the vibe is there. You've got this demonic presence. The woman is shying away from it, whether that's through fear, despair, or embarrassment because he's nude, who knows. Moving on, and usually the Archeon is a wild card, and there are 3 wild card decks in my little pile here, but the Archeon, she tends to vibe with the rest of them here. I should have said there was a booby alert, because there is boobies in here. What I really like about this card is how the swords start there and they end up there, almost like a gate. Who knows? So the Archeon's its little subheading is without hope. They watch the dawn in silence. I suppose that suggests that they were up for dawn. Not a great feat if it's the summer, but if this is winter, then yeah, they've been up all night. What a shame. But yeah, again, the vibe's there. Now, interestingly about the Archeon is it's one of the decks where if you were to reverse it, it becomes immediately positive. The reversal meanings, according to the book, suggest faith, trust, promise, an end to suffering, and something else which I can't remember, but I'm sure it was positive. So that's interesting, because a lot of these decks, the reversals, is just more of the same, or a watered down version of despair. There is a little bit of getting over it, but like I've already suggested, I'm not keen on that whole just snap out of it vibe. I say vibe too much. Never mind. Unusually, the Deviant Moon is pretty straight-laced. Usually the Deviant Moon has an interesting twist to it. There is an interesting twist, but the image is incredibly similar. A very creepy card from a very creepy deck. I would personally expect it to be a bit creepier, but no. You have a demon on the on this person's shoulder, male or female, who knows. They're biting their hand in fear. They've been woken up, so they've been woken up by some sort of nightmare, or maybe that demon is real. Again, you have an astrological element on the blanket. And also, just like the Archeon, once we reverse it, I believe it says something along the lines of, I can't remember. I cannot remember. She'll be fine, something like that. But there is more positive connotations on the reversal card with the Deviant Moon, much like the Archeon, much unlike some of the other decks. So now we're moving on to the Hermetic decks. Here is the Hermetic deck, and here is the Magic Ritual Golden Dawn deck, and also the Tot deck. I'll go to the Tot last of all. And of course with the Hermetic decks, they helpfully tell us, they remind us that here is Mars in Gemini. As with the Hermetic decks, it's probably worth mentioning that the Kabbalistic influence is Yesod in the scale of Yetzirah, which is higher intellect reduced to callous thought. There's an influence of the moon in this, whatever it means, as well as Mars, which is the Seraph of Geburah. But yeah, so it's just weakening everything that's in there. Now, of course, Mars is not weak, and he was bringing this wrath and this strength and is turning it into despair and cruelty. The Golden Dawn title of this card is the Lord of Despair and Cruelty. Despair and Cruelty. Now, interestingly, with the Ritual Magic Golden Dawn deck, I'm pretty sure I never get the full title right, but it doesn't matter. Much like the Eight of Swords previously, you've got these hands that are holding two swords at the same time, which is amazing. And also, a lot of the images in this Golden Dawn deck incorporate a rose, but not in here. It's been utterly destroyed. It's not missing, it's not there, it's been utterly destroyed. Yeah, so here's the top, and I love this card. I love this card so much. Again, it's such an interesting use of colour. You have these red drops that are coming down. Sorry, you have these yellow drops that are coming down, which I believe symbolise the element of air. But once they get to the points of these swords, they turn into blood, symbolising Mars. It's a very evocative image, and Crowley named this card Cruelty. And there's no messing around there. Because Mars is influencing Gemini of the mind. It just makes him cruel. And a lot of these self-inflicted neuroses that we've been talking about, you're just being cruel to yourself, or indeed there is a part of your mind that has manifested that's being cruel to you, and you can't just snap out of it. Love the top deck. So finally we have the wild cards. Now this is cracking. This is the Cosmic Tarot, and what the hell is going on here? It's very different. It's very different indeed. It's almost like the Eight of Swords gone wrong. The Eight of Wands, excuse me, gone wrong. Those flying wands to indicate swiftness have turned into swords, and this poor guy is impaled. Now, interestingly, the Cosmic Tarot suggests that this guy is in a war zone, and indeed you can see a tank there, and there's a jet bombing stuff, or at least a plane that's bombing stuff. There are explosions going on, and of course war goes back to that original title of the Tower, which was War. I'm not sure if it was previous or after the House of God, which again is a Hermetic Golden Dawn thing, but you're getting this sense of war, and this poor guy has been impaled by two of these 9 swords. I'm just counting the swords, there is indeed 9. What a shocking image. Also, that snake down there, that's the Serpent of Life. And that has also... There's nothing about dreams or nightmares here. I mean, this guy is in a war zone. He could very well be dreaming it, of course. But that's a really brutal image. Really brutal. And that sword has skewered him. It's gone right through him. And there's a building just there that's fallen down. Maybe that also symbolises the Tower. So yeah, you've got that Mars influence in a very strong way in the Cosmic Tarot. And I believe the book does say the same sort of things: despair, disillusionment, pain, I believe is one of them as well. But a crazy card. Finally, the last 2 wild cards are by the same illustrator. And if you watched at least 2 of my videos, you're going to know that one of them is going to be the Night Sun, and the other one is going to be the Santa Muerte by the very brilliant Fabiella Strani. Let's talk about the Santa Muerte first. Now, on face value, this image does kind of strike to be as similar. And we very much have got the 9 of Swords here, although you do get an 8 of Swords vibe as well, because you've got these things... These swords, that they're almost like kebab skewers that are impaling the mind. What I also like about the Santa Muerte is you got a spade. Just to remind us that the sort of swords corresponds to the suit of spades in a average plain deck of cards. Now, the Santa Muerte does come with Advice from the Dead. Well, okay, why this is a wild card, although the image does indeed vibe, with the exception of that book is a bit of a mystery. But the explanation in the book to the Santa Muerte Nine of Swords is nowhere near as bleak as anywhere else. I'll read it out to you. With the Nine of Swords, we have the preconditions for a possible crisis due to a period of enclosure and isolation. That enclosure and isolation could very well be manifest from the Eight of Swords. However, seclusion well utilised, however, will enable new wisdom, new light and new nourishment, which will enable the rebirth of our consciences and stain our will, as well as limiting injuries, waste, ambiguity and diffidence. Which actually is a really positive spin on what has been quite a bleak card. Oh, Nine of Swords there. Also, the Santa Muerte comes with Advice from the Dead. Act with strength and prudence, ensuring your ideas are well focused and directing all your strength on these. So, strength, prudence, you're getting those, those classical Christian virtues coming in here. But again, it just doesn't sit quite right with the rest of the Nine of the Swords because of its positive upbeat manner. And maybe if you're looking for a resolution to the Nine of Swords, then that's the sort of bent you should be going for. Cracking. This video is going on way too long. So let's just talk about the Night Sun. Now, you've got Mars, you've got Gemini, you've got these skewered swords in the ground. No suggestion of nightmares, but what you do have, you have this flower that's growing through. Now, it's a mystery to me, which is, I've said before many times, is one of the reasons why I love the Night Sun. And we're talking about suns, but it almost feels like there's a sun superimposed on that flower there. And maybe it suggests to me that there is indeed hope. Maybe. So finally, what do you do if the Nine of Swords comes up in a reading? There's that school of thought to suggest that there is no such thing as positive and negative cards, which I disagree with. The Two of Cups is a lovely card. The Nine of Swords is not. So if it comes up in a reading, whether it be yourself or for somebody else, you're going to have to ascertain whether or not that this is something that's known to the querent. Again, if it's for yourself or somebody else. Are they aware that they're having this cycles of worry? Are they aware that things like depression and anxiety are manifesting because they're thinking about things too much, that they're putting too much detail in their thoughts, that they keep going round and round? And do you know what? The one thing I've completely forgotten to mention that's mentioned a lot of times in a lot of decks, that the Nine of Swords is known as the Dark Night of the Soul card, which maybe if I said that earlier, this video would be 10 minutes shorter. I don't know. But yeah, so if it comes up in a reading, some of the advice, some of the angles that you may want to consider articulating are things like you need to confront your self-doubt. You need to find a way to accept yourself, to battle negativity. Maybe the querent is refusing point blank to face up to their deepest fears. And, every now and then you do actually have to look your fears square in the eyes and sort them out. Overall, amongst anything else, if this comes up in a reading, I would advise somebody to reach out and get some help. If you are anxious and worried, sometimes all you need to do is talk about it. Just say it out loud. Say that cycle of worry that's going around your head. Just say it in actual voice with proper words, and maybe some of that burden will automatically lift. But of course, if it comes up in a reading, it's obviously contextual with the rest of the reading, and everybody is different, which is where I'm going to leave it. I sincerely hope you don't have any nightmares tonight, and if you do, it's okay, it's alright. Come and have a hug. It's fine. Thank you very much for watching as usual. This is the Hidden Hermit, and sleep well.